Alcatraz prison is arguably the most famous prison in America. This prison is located on a small island in the San Francisco Bay, nicknamed the Rock. It at one point was used as a military prison until 1934 when it was converted to a federal prison. It would remain a federal prison until 1963. This prison was meant for the worst of the worst, with harsh conditions and strict rules. The strong currents and freezing waters made escaping nearly impossible. This, however, did not mean people did not try. There is no confirmed successful escapes from Alcatraz, but there are many failed attempts. These are the attempted escapes from Alcatraz. The first man to attempt to escape was Joseph Bowers. He would make his failed escape on April 27, 1936. Joseph was born in Austria and was currently serving a 25-year sentence for robbery of mail with a firearm. Joseph was assigned incinerator detail, which basically meant his job was to burn trash. On the day of his escape, in broad daylight, in full view of the guards, Joseph was seen lighting a pile of trash on fire, then turning and running to the fence line. He would attempt to scale the fence in hopes of making it to the shoreline. The guards ordered him down, but he persisted. When he reached the top of the fence, the guards opened fire, causing Joseph to fall 50 feet, where he would succumb to his injuries, making him the first prisoner to attempt and fail at escaping Alcatraz. The second attempt would happen just over 2 years later, on May 23, 1938, by three men: Rufus Franklin, who was serving life in prison for bank robbery, car theft, and assault; James C. Lucas was serving life in prison for robbing First National Bank in Texas; Thomas R. Limerick was serving a life sentence for robbing banks all throughout the U.S., as well as kidnapping. Three men serving life with nothing to lose would make a desperate attempt to escape. The three men overpowered a guard by the name of Royal Klein. The men would beat Klein to death with a claw hammer. They would then climb to the roof of the wood workshop building. I'm not sure what the plan was from there. Two of the men, Rufus Franklin and Thomas Limerick, would be gunned down, while James Lucas would surrender. No one would attempt again for another 17 months, until May 21, 1941. Lloyd Barkdahl, aged 37, was serving life for bank robbery in Oregon. Sam Shockley, aged 32, sentenced to life in prison for murder. Joe Kretzer and Arnold Kyle, the two leaders of the Kretzel-Kyle gang, both serving life in prison for bank robbery. The four men decided to use strength in numbers and overpower the guards on duty. With the guards beaten down, the men used a saw on the bars of the windows. They soon figured out the saw was nowhere near strong enough to cut the bars of the windows. All would surrender without further incident. Just 4 short months later, on September 15, 1941, John Bayliss, a man serving a 20-year sentence at Alcatraz for bank robbery by force, would make it the farthest in all the attempts so far. He slipped past the guards and made it to the shoreline. From there, he would attempt to swim to San Francisco, but the bone-chilling water and strong ocean current would prove to be too difficult. he would quickly return to the shores of Alcatraz. For almost 2 years, no attempts would be made until April 14th, 1943, when 4 men would make a brazen attempt to flee. James Borman was serving time at Alcatraz for bank robbery. I could not find what he was sentenced to, but could only find that he had been at Alcatraz for 2.5 years. Fred Hunter, who was serving a 25-year sentence for postal robbery, assault, conspiracy, and harboring a fugitive. Floyd Hamilton, who at one point was considered public enemy number one, was serving a 22-year sentence for robbing a Coca-Cola bottling plant at gunpoint. The fourth man was Harold Brest, who actually served time at Alcatraz 2 separate times, was currently serving life plus 55 years for kidnapping 2 little girls. The 4 men managed to somehow cut the bar windows. They would overpower 2 guards, which they would gag and tie up before slipping through the window. They would grab 2 out of 4 gas cans they had previously stashed close by with soldiers' uniforms inside. They would use these cans as flotation devices. As they entered the water, one of the guards managed to free one of his arms, allowing him to blow his whistle, alerting the tower guards of the escape attempt. The guards would open fire on the 4 men, striking and killing Floyd Hamilton, whose body would slip out of view and never be recovered. The guards would gravely wound James Borman. Harold Brest would grab on to James until guards pulled Brest from the water. Borman's body would sink and never be found. Fred Hunter was wounded in the escape attempt, but he was able to make it to a cave where he would hide until eventually being found as the guards spotted a blood trail leading to the cave opening. 2 men returned to Alcatraz, while 2 men were lost to the sea. Huron Walters would make a sad attempt to escape on August 7th, 1943. Walters noted the dwindled guards on duty during the weekends, and with the majority of the guards' attention on the recreation yard, he came up with the brilliant idea of using wire cutters to cut through 2 fences, run to the shoreline, and swim to freedom. His plan immediately failed at the first fence when the wire cutters were unable to cut through. He decided scaling the 2 fences was the next best thing, which he proceeded to do. As he climbed the second fence, he would fall to the jagged rocks below, injuring his back, thus ending his escape attempt. The next escape wouldn't happen until July 31st, 1945. John Giles was originally sentenced to life in prison in Oregon. He would escape, and while on the run, he would attempt to rob the Denver and Rio Grande Western Mail train. He would eventually be sent to Alcatraz to finish out his life sentence. Giles, over time, would steal pieces of military uniforms until eventually he had a full uniform. The morning of July 31st, he would board a boat leaving Alcatraz, headed to San Francisco, by hiding in a hatchway below the deck. Once the boat pulled away from the island, he would join the other soldiers on board. His plan seemed to be a success until a count of all on board revealed 1 extra man, causing the boat to return to Alcatraz and John Giles being caught. Things on the island would be calm until May of 1946, when the Battle of Alcatraz would break out. On May 2nd, 1946, 6 inmates, Mirren Thompson, Bernard Coy, Marvin Hubbard, Clarence Carnes, Sam Shockley, and Joseph Kretzer. Yes, the same Sam Shockley and Joseph Kretzer from the May 1941 escape attempt. Bernard Coy and Marvin Hubbard attacked and subdued Officer William Miller. The two men planned the attack while the second guard on duty had stepped away, and all other guards and inmates were outside. The two men would then free Joseph Kretzer and Clarence Carnes from their cells. The four men made their way to the gun gallery and located a weak spot in the bars. They used a makeshift device to spread the bars apart big enough for Bernard Coy to fit through. Coy purposely lost weight before the escape attempt to ensure he would fit. Once on the other side, he would attack and restrain Officer Bert Birch. Coy armed himself with a rifle and lowered down a pistol, set of keys, clubs, and a gas grenade to his 3 accomplices. Coy would hold another guard at gunpoint, forcing him to open the doors that would allow the 3 others to enter a cell block and free a dozen other prisoners. However, only 2 men, Sam Shockley and Mirren Thompson, would join in on the hostile escape, while the remaining prisoners would return to their cells. The 6 inmates would take the keys from Officer Miller and attempt to open a door that would lead them to a dock where a boat awaited. This was their escape plan. However, the door was jammed and the escapees failed to open it, leaving them trapped in the cell house. As more guards made their rounds and entered the cell block, they would be quickly subdued by the 6 inmates until the total of 9 guards were being held captive. With nowhere to run, in a panic, the convicts decided they would shoot their way out. Kretzer would then shoot and wound 5 officers, one of which would later pass from his injuries. Feeling this had all gone too far, Clarence Carnes, Sam Shockley, and Mirren Thompson admitted defeat and returned to their cells. The shots fired alerted the other guards, and they entered the cell block, where a shootout would ensue. 4 officers were seriously injured, while 1 would lose his life. The warden asked for the help of a nearby naval station, who sent 2 platoons of Marines to aid the guards in their attempt to regain control of the prison. The Marines, led by World War II veteran warrant officers Charles Buckner, cornered the convicts into a utility corridor, where the 3 remaining inmates would call the warden to discuss a deal. Surrender was the only option, to which Kretzer replied he wouldn't be taken alive. The day would pass, and it would become clear the inmates would not surrender peacefully. The Marines opened fire, raining bullets into the utility corridor. On May 4th, they would enter the corridor and find the bodies of Hubbard, Coy, and Kretzer, putting an end to the most violent Alcatraz escape attempt. It would be 10 years before another dared to attempt to escape. Floyd Wilson would make his bleak attempt to escape on July 23, 1956. Floyd was sentenced to death by execution for murder. On the day of his escape, he would hide in the jagged rocks and attempt to build a makeshift raft. He failed, and that was the end of his attempt. Aaron Burgett, who was serving a 25-year sentence for assault, and Clyde Johnson, serving a 40-year sentence for armed robbery, overpowered a guard and jumped into the San Francisco Bay. Burgett had tied wooden planks to his shoes to use as makeshift fins. Both men attempted to use plastic bags as flotation devices. The police were able to locate and capture Clyde Johnson, but there was no sign of Aaron Burgett. 2 weeks later, his body would be spotted by a guard floating in the bay. This next attempt is by far the most known escape attempt from Alcatraz. It is shrouded with mystery and conspiracy theories. This escape attempt inspired TV shows, movies, and will remain as one of the most captivating escape attempts of Alcatraz. Frank Morris, a convict who escaped from a Louisiana prison while serving a 10-year sentence. He was shipped off to Alcatraz, where he would meet brothers and fellow inmates, John and Clarence Anglin. John was originally sentenced to 10 years prison, and Clarence was serving 15 years, both for armed robbery. Alan West, a lesser-known inmate involved in the escape, was serving the rest of his time at Alcatraz after he had previously escaped from a Florida prison. Morris was the brains behind the escape, and it took 6 months of planning. In those 6 months, the men used any tools they could get a hold of, such as discarded saw blades and spoons. They also managed to make a makeshift drill. They slowly chiseled holes through their cell walls. To hide the sounds of their construction work, they would take turns playing an accordion. The men would also make papier-mâché heads that would resemble them. When the holes were wide enough to fit through, the men would enter an unguarded utility room. In this room, they would make life preservers from raincoats. The men stashed the life preservers in the utility room and began building a raft inside of the room as well. The raft was made of rubber and was sealed with liquid plastic the men had swiped from the working shops. They made paddles out of plywood. Once all the items were built, they hid them in the utility room until the night of June 11th, 1962. All 4 men would wait for the right time to place their papier-mâché heads in their beds and slip through the pre-carved holes. Unfortunately, for Alan West, he had used liquid plastic to hold the outer edges of the hole together as it was beginning to crumble. By the time he was ready to escape, the rubber had hardened and expanded, making the hole too small to fit through. He began to pick away at the hole in hopes of still making his escape. While West carved away, the other 3 men slipped out of their cells into the utility room, where they would grab their homemade supplies. From there, they would climb a ventilation shaft to the roof. They used a kitchen pipe to slide down 50 feet, then climbed a 12-foot barbed wire fence, all while carrying a 6 by 14-foot raft. By the time West managed to fit through his cell walls, the other 3 men had left him behind. He accepted defeat and returned to his cell. The 3 men made it to the shoreline, put their boat into the water, got in, and what authorities assume headed towards Angel Island, 2 miles away, and in the cover of night, they left Alcatraz. It wasn't till the next morning guards realized the 3 men had escaped. Over the next 10 days, a thorough search was done. A wallet was found, as well as shredded raincoats, and what authorities believe to be a piece of the raft. However, the three men have never been found. The men are still classified as wanted, while authorities claim there is no way the men could have survived. There have been many who claim to have seen the men over the years. The two brothers' moms reportedly received flowers every year on Mother's Day until her passing. Some claimed to see two strangely large women with heavy makeup at her funeral. And when their father passed, two bearded men arrived, paid their respects, and quickly left. Many believe it was the Anglin brothers. The FBI received a letter from someone claiming to be John Anglin. The letter claimed Morris passed in 2008, while Clarence passed in 2011. The writer said he was terminally ill and would be turning himself in. DNA was tested on the letter, but all results came back inconclusive. The final escape attempt would be made by two men on December 16, 1962. Darrell Lee Parker was serving a 50-year sentence in Alcatraz for robbery. John Paul Scott was serving a 30-year prison sentence for bank robbery and possession of an unregistered firearm. The men would use a self-made saw to cut through the bars of a kitchen window. From there, they would run into the water. Darrell only made it about 81 yards, where he would climb to the rocks of what is affectionately named Little Alcatraz. Remarkably, John Scott would be found suffering from hypothermia, but on the San Francisco bank, underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. To this date, he is the only confirmed inmate escapee to swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. Even though his attempt was one for the books, he was returned to Alcatraz after being treated at a local hospital. This is just a quick rundown of the inmates and their escape attempts. Each person has their own unique stories that could be a whole other video. Alcatraz would eventually close, and all remaining inmates would be transferred out. The escapes range from spur of the moment to methodically planned. In the end, 16 men would attempt to escape, and officially, none would. Do you think the Anglin brothers and Morris made it to the other side, or did the San Francisco Bay claim the three for herself? Are there other successful escapes that officials covered up as to not lose the hardened reputation of Alcatraz? These questions will remain unanswered.